Hi there, I'm Alex Boone. Welcome to my studio. I've got something special to share with you today, my first two books. I'm going to make a process video later on, sharing a little bit about how I came to be a first-time author illustrator and just, the process of actually making these two art books. But for now, I just want to give you a little flip through so you can see inside and perhaps see whether these are something you'd like to invest in. Okay, let's start off with the obvious here. Yes, there are two books and they share the same publication date. My publisher, as you can see on the back here, David and Charles, they wanted to produce a nature art series, so we needed to have two books coming out together to kind of get this series up and running. So the first title is How to Draw a Tree from the Fruit to the Forest, and the second title is How to Draw a River from the Source to the Sea. They chose a very beautiful cover. You can see here it's a lovely texture. It's a little bit like kind of a watercolor paper, and it's kind of got a gloss varnish on it to keep it nice and clean as well. We've got a lovely print of one of the illustrations from within the book here on the front cover, and the same on the back cover here. As you may know, I'm very much a nature journaling artist, which means my focus is on being outside in nature, drawing particularly on location, and then bringing ideas back to the studio to work on a more detailed journal. And I try to carry this ethos out throughout both of these books. There's something wonderful about how they sit on the shelf, this lovely, clean, white cover, and the publisher's mark down here on the bottom. Each of the two books has a different colour end papers for the river. Obviously it's a lovely blue like this. I was very happy with how this first page came out with the front piece here, and then one of the illustrations from inside has been blown up bigger here, and I was able to dedicate the books to the memory of my grandma who taught me to paint when I was little. So both of them have this dedication to the memory of my grandma, Joan Ives. And we have a contents page here. And then a little introduction about the book and how to use it, and a kind of charming picture of me here on the front page. So I really wanted these books to, rather than be a kind of copy this photograph how-to art book, they have a structure that allows you to start using your own river or a local river as a project and taking the ideas that are given to you in this book and then working on those for your particular river. That's kind of the intention here. Rather than sort of copying things through the book, it gives you ideas and a process for you to then go and use on your own favourite river. There's a section on drawing materials in each of the books, and it's quite similar between the two. And then a little bit on how to select colours when you're doing coloured pencil work. The main colouring medium in both of the books is coloured pencil, as they were intended to be drawing books rather than painting books. They don't go into too much detail on the very technical aspects of using coloured pencil, but more give you the information that you need to actually get started on working on your own river project. So every single one of the chapters is split up into 4 lessons, and each chapter has this kind of lovely textured opening page with one of my own illustrations on the side. With rivers, we begin on looking at tonal ranges, which is an important exercise that I'm always teaching my students in my classes, and I really recommend that if you're not used to doing tonal studies like this, that you get started with this whenever you pick up a new medium. From here we go into these little squares and looking at when the water's still, whether there's kind of fish under the surface, whether there's shadows or vegetation, and how to just use graphite pencil to just make these tiny little boxes and practice using those tonal ranges. The books are both structured as having an exercise followed by a gallery of a few examples of my own work. You can see in here there's kind of a lot more detail and a lot more time that's been put into the gallery examples rather than the little exercises which just show you how to get started, and this is how you can progress from there. The next lesson in here is all about moving water, and this can be quite tricky. So I recommend actually sitting by the river and using little squiggly lines to help you decide how the river is moving. Understanding how the water is moving can really help you to create more detailed illustrations. There's lots of examples of this in here, followed by a few ideas of how to actually use this when you are creating your own artwork in practice. You can see here in this one the difference between the still area of the river at the back and the dappled moving area of the river here up front. In lesson 3, we take these a little bit further and start working in coloured pencil. So I talk a bit about how to make realistic ripples on the surface of the water using different coloured pencils. And then a bit about how to build up vegetation and water movement through your coloured pencil work. Now I get really into the nature journaling. This final lesson in the first chapter is a river sketchbook, which is all about you creating your own river sketchbook, river journal that you go out and do regularly. There's lots of examples here and suggestions on how to actually get out and nature journal your river. The next chapter is looking more at the river in the wider landscape, so how to actually create landscape art featuring a river. We look at the river in its different iterations as you go from the source to the sea. So we begin with the source and look at how rivers look when they're at their narrowest and when they're at their beginnings. This particular example is of a bog, which is the source of the River Severn here in the UK. I didn't want the book to be too UK-centric, so I also used stock photography as reference images to look at our rivers in other parts of the world as well. Moving on then from the graphite work, we go back into ink. You'll notice that every single chapter in this book begins with a graphite study, followed by an ink study, followed by a coloured pencil study, and then something a little bit different for the final exercise. So this one's all about how to use cross-hatching in your work, and it uses a lovely reference photograph that I took in Wales. I also talk a little bit about how to use colour with your line work, leaving lots of negative space and drawing the eye into that central moving water. The next lesson goes on to the mature river, which is looking at the wide rivers that often we position our cities on. So I use London as the example here, looking at a Tower Bridge. And going from a kind of relatively average reference photograph to something that's got lots of life and colour. You can see that I really maxed up the colour here, brought lots more green into the river, and really wanted to emphasise the reflections through this particular one. The final lesson in this section is focusing on using brush pens, and you can do something quite fun with this, where you can almost make it look like a print by doing blocks of colour, and I look at how to build up these blocks of colour through this exercise. It's kind of a simplified landscape here. If you don't have brush pens, you can also do this in coloured pencil. In the third section of this book, I'm looking at the species that dwell in the river, so fish, humans, birds, and insects as a starter. So I talk a little bit about different ways of using line and shape methods to sketch birds and boats. This time bringing in fine liner here because it's the second lesson in the book and we always add ink in the second lesson. Sometimes a little bit of colour here too. I like to look at boats from all around the world in this section. Now here's the insect life chapter, which gives some tips about taking reference photos of insects first, and then goes on to doing a really detailed drawing of a damselfly. In the final lesson of this section, we look at mixed media, so adding a little bit of paint this time. So we have a paint layer first, and then adding coloured pencil over the top. And I talk a little bit about some techniques for doing this. The final chapter is all about using different techniques to represent your river, particularly if you want to turn this into a bit of a river project. So we begin with a few different mapping techniques. I'm using my local river, the River Collie, as an example for this. And then having a look at perhaps using something like Google Earth or satellite mapping to do some fun little drawings of different rivers across the world. Next, I'm adapting phenology wheels. Phenology wheels are a wonderful nature journaling technique, but I decided to actually turn them into river wheels instead and start looking at some of the features of the river, things like the colour of the water and the temperature at different times of year. And then sometimes doing things like birds, what birds are seen along the river. So I'm picking a favourite observation that I made that month to fill each one of these little segments. And there are phenology wheel templates for sale on my website, and they're free for members of the Nature Journaling Circle as well. So if you want to get hold of a template just like this to fill yourself, that's already available on my website. Next lesson is a little bit more of technique, so focusing on how to use toned paper and coloured pencil together and build up a picture in layers, coming up with this final image here. The final lesson is collage, and I add collage in both of the final chapters of both books. It's quite a fun way to work. And this time we're trying to look at rivers in terms of the damage that we do to them and looking at pollution and how we can show the problem in a creative kind of way to raise awareness. At the end of each book, there's a few little pages that talk about a few different things that relate to the topics of the book. In both of them, I have a section on nature journaling, since that is my main thing, and a little section about my nature journaling circle too. A few things about how to identify species with some ideas on that, and some processes that I use for identifying species. I teach these in person and online. Then finally, I wanted to add a section of how you can use your art to raise awareness about the problems that are facing rivers in the world. So there's a little section on that here. And then there's kind of your final resources, bibliography. It's my biography and an index, and that's kind of, then we have the copyright page here, and that's kind of the end. Now, I'm not going to spend quite so much time on the tree one because there are a few things that are in common that I've already explained between the two books, but let's have a little look and just see what's inside here. Again with the tree book, lovely green end papers this time, a dedication to my grandma, and the contents page. So there's quite a few sections sort of in common. They don't have the exact same text in them. They're slightly different, but they have a very similar structure because this is kind of a series and we want to have this structure going through all of them. A little bit here about how to get to know trees. So again, just like with the rivers one, this is not really about learning to copy a photograph that I've given you, although I do have all of the reference images from this book are available on my Flickr account, which is listed at the end of the book. So you can have those reference images if you want to, but it's more about finding a tree that means something to you. Here's a few things here about how to choose the tree, and then a little bit here about how to record it. Again, some drawing materials section and colours section here. And then, just like in the Rivers book here, we're just splitting it up into 4 chapters, each with 4 lessons. And it starts quite simple, kind of a little bit about how to observe trees, how to draw them quite simply, kind of using like a little skeleton tree to help you. And then how to make a tree with foliage look realistic. I often find when I'm teaching beginners that this is a bit of a challenge doing this. And you can build it up using this skeleton structure and then adding your foliage in. And how to do that is all described in this book. Going on to ink work, so fine liner work for the most part, here in these second lessons of each chapter. And then coloured pencil work in the 3rd lesson. So starting with a relatively simple shape here, just this apple and some cherries, and then adding a little bit of background on how to do that in coloured pencil. Again, the final lesson in this chapter is a nature journaling lesson. So it's all about how to document a tree through the seasons. And a few examples from my own nature journals here. Next, we look at things in a little bit more detail, some of the more complex structures of trees. So we have pine cones here first, doing those in graphite and sometimes adding a little coloured pencil. And then the structure of the winter tree, which takes a little bit of getting used to drawing in this way. It's kind of an element of patience that goes to it, but I show you through the steps that you can use to make a tree drawing like this, which is also the one that's on the front cover here. And another look through some of my previous tree sketches. Then there's a few techniques for coloured pencil. We're looking at creating a blossom drawing here. And then again with some blossoms on the apple tree here too. So it's kind of a bit about composition, how you don't have to include everything to make a compelling drawing. Next up, we're looking at the tree at different times of year. So we've got berries, we've got its flowers, its twigs and its leaves, and making grids, which you can turn into things like bookmarks and postcards and field guides. Then just like the river, we're setting the tree in its landscape. So we're looking at ways to draw the surroundings of your favourite tree, beginning with a detailed forest. So this is an example from the Amazon rainforest here. And this is a temperate woodland scene. So this is one that's a bit more local to me than the Amazon rainforest. And looking at ideas like putting in a bit of coloured pencil here to draw the eye to certain parts of a picture. And then again, going into cross-hatching. So there's kind of a bit of a common theme between the two books, but the application of cross-hatching here is slightly different. We're kind of making these deep, dense conifer forest outlines here and really using the cross-hatching effect to make them look deep and dark. This is one of my favourite chapters, looking at the autumn colour and how to represent the bright colours of autumn in coloured pencil. You can see here, this is kind of a zoomed in version of the aces on the previous page. This was a fun one. This is all about using different toned papers to make a layered textured landscape. You can draw them in coloured pencil first and then kind of cut them out to create a multi-layered scene. I was particularly happy with how this little one here came out. And now we're coming into our reimagining chapter, which is again going a bit off-piste with some of the ideas that you can use to represent trees. So we're looking at abstraction first, and abstraction isn't something that I do very often, but I really enjoyed doing this and breaking it down a little bit as a process for the book. Abstracting in coloured pencil is really, really fun. So I kind of explain a little bit about how I approached it here, so you can try it yourself as well. And then we're back to London here for the urban trees section. And we're looking in lots of details, particularly how to build some really detailed kind of foliage pictures in cross-hatching with fine liner, using a couple of different examples. And then this was a fun one. 2 different ways of doing trees coming out of a box. So the first one, we kind of got this black hand-drawn background, which is then drawn on with a white fine liner. And then this one, we've got a white paper and we're making the tree subject escape from this little frame that we've drawn. There's a few fun examples of that here too. And then finally, just like in the Rivers book, we have some collage to end off with, using leaf pressings from autumn. And just like before, we have a nature journaling section, a section on species identification, stewardship, with a little example of a kind of tree story that occurred in my own artwork here. And then we finish off with resources, bibliography, and all of this. And that's those. They should be available now from where you get your books. If not, they will definitely be available after the 22nd of July, which is the official publication date. I hope you enjoyed that little tour through my books, and I really hope that you'll consider investing in 1 or 2 of the titles. I've left the Amazon link down in the description, so if you'd like to pre-order through that, that would be awesome, but you can order them in any bookshop close to you, and they'll sort you out with a couple of copies. I'd really like to know which one of the 2 books was your favourite. Please let me know what you thought in the comments, and if you have a copy, it would be awesome if you'd leave me a review on Amazon or Goodreads. That would be really, really helpful for getting the word out there about my work. Next video is going to be about the process, so a little bit about how I kind of found myself as an author illustrator for the first time. Thank you so much for watching. That video will be out soon. I'll see you next time.